The dust from my pickup hadn't even settled before I spotted police cruisers barreling down the private road toward my family ranch. I stepped out slowly, boots crunching against the familiar gravel as I surveyed the land that had belonged to my bloodline for generations. The metal gate still held our name, faded, scarred, but proud as ever. Then her voice sliced through the desert air, sharp enough to split stone. A woman in her 50s, hair perfectly lacquered into place, and clutching a clipboard like a weapon, stood behind two sheriff's deputies and pointed directly at me. "That's him," she screeched with full, righteous fury. "That's the trespasser I called about. He's been lurking around this abandoned property all morning." I kept still, hands visible, posture relaxed. 20 years in special operations had taught me that the loudest voice in the room was usually the least dangerous one. The deputies approached with caution, hands resting on their duty belts, eyes measuring me. What the woman didn't know, what she had no way of knowing, was that I wasn't some suspicious drifter. I was Cole Garrison, the legal owner of every square inch she was standing on. And I had just returned from a mission so classified that even local law enforcement wasn't cleared to know where I'd been for the past 8 months. My name is Cole Garrison, and I inherited Garrison Ranch from my grandfather when I was 25. My story begins with the land itself, 800 acres of untouched, pristine Nevada countryside, complete with natural springs, canyon ridges, and endless views. Since 1942, it had been our refuge, our identity or compass. When I enlisted straight out of high school, deploying again and again to places that officially didn't exist, the ranch always stayed rooted in my mind as home. For 2 decades, I served in a string of special operations assignments, often disappearing for months at a time. 8 months ago, received another set of orders, high priority, classified, need to vanish now. I can't tell you what the assignment was, and it doesn't matter. What matters is that before I left, I placed the entire ranch under the care of a property management company known for handling the homes of deployed service members. Their job was simple: keep the land secure, deal with any issues, and maintain absolute discretion. I paid them well. Everything was put in order: property taxes paid 5 years ahead, utilities set on autopay, security systems monitored, maintenance schedules arranged. Then I disappeared again, as I always did. What I didn't know was that 3 months into my deployment, a brand new housing development sprang up next to my property. Sunset Hills Estates, complete with an HOA and all the petty bureaucracy those 3 letters tend to attract. The star of this operation, and the engine behind its overreach, was its newly elected HOA President, Patricia Kellerman, though from what I would later hear, everyone called her Karen behind her back, and soon understand why. Karen had moved into Sunset Hills with her husband, a quiet, shrinking accountant who looked like he'd been apologizing for her for most of his life. She ran for HOA president on a platform of community improvement and protecting property values, and won by exactly 2 votes. She interpreted this razor-thin win as a divine mandate to control every inch of her neighborhood with an iron grip, wrapped in passive-aggressive newsletters. Within a week, as she rolled out fines for grass a 1/4 inch too tall, mailboxes that weren't the regulation shade of beige, and garbage cans visible from the street for more than 30 minutes after pickup. But none of that compared to her next fixation. Karen became obsessed with my ranch. From her backyard, she could see my fence line, and the sight of a natural, undisturbed, working property seemed to personally offend her. She never saw the management crew, who visited twice a month. She only saw tall grasses I kept for wildlife, the lack of decorative landscaping, and the absence of daily activity. In her mind, my ranch wasn't protected land maintained in its natural state. It was a blight on her manicured kingdom. She started small, sending HOA violation letters to my property, oblivious to the fact that her HOA had 0 jurisdiction over land established 80 years before Sunset Hills ever existed. Those letters, forwarded to a military post office box I couldn't access from my deployment location, naturally went unanswered. So she escalated. She filed complaints with the county, claiming the ranch was abandoned. She called code enforcement about imaginary violations. She even tried dragging the health department into it. insisting that my natural pond was a mosquito breeding hazard. Every agency investigated, found the property maintained and paid up, and dismissed her complaints. But instead of backing down, each rejection only sharpened her obsession. She dove into property law with the enthusiasm of a first-year law student armed with half-understood internet articles. She became convinced she'd found a loophole according to her misinterpretation of adverse possession laws. If a property looked abandoned for 6 months, she could claim it. That's when Karen made her first major mistake. She marched into the county office and filed official paperwork claiming my ranch as unclaimed land eligible for reclamation. The county clerk, who had known my family for decades, tried telling her she was wasting her time, but Karen insisted, paid the filing fee with a smug grin, and walked out believing she had just expanded her HOA by 800 acres. Then she made it worse. Emboldened by paperwork she didn't understand, she hired a fencing crew to install chain link fencing along a new boundary she had invented, seizing 40 acres of my land and declaring it Sunset Hills Community Space. She posted signs, scheduled HOA events on my property, even planned a 4th of July barbecue and a community yard sale on land she didn't own. Not everyone in Sunset Hills supported her. Robert Dalton, a retired judge living 3 houses down, tried warning her she was trespassing at best and flirting with fraud at worst, but Karen brushed him off. She didn't need advice, not when she thought she was building her empire. She snapped at him, accusing the retired judge of jealousy and sabotaging her leadership, even threatening him with HOA fines for daring to question her authority. After that, most neighbors kept quiet, unwilling to risk becoming her next target. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, I was finishing a classified operation, completely unaware that a suburban Napoleon was in the middle of attempting a land grab on my family ranch. It wasn't until I finally reached a secure facility with an internet terminal that I received an encrypted message from my property management company. They'd been trying to reach me for weeks about an urgent situation that demanded immediate attention. The message lacked specifics, but the tone was enough to make me accelerate my return home. I landed at Nellis Air Force Base at 0300 on a Tuesday morning. By 0800, I was behind the wheel of my old pickup, driving the familiar desert roads toward the ranch I'd been away from for 8 months. 2 weeks and 3 days. As I neared my property, the newly constructed development was impossible to miss. Identical houses with copy-paste lawns sprawled across land that had once been open desert. But the real shock waited at my gate. A bright yellow sign was zip-tied across the metal bars, "Property of Sunset Hills HOA, no trespassing." Bandit. I spotted the chain link fence slicing across my land, and, near my grandfather's old windmill, what looked like picnic tables arranged for some kind of neighborhood event. I felt the anger rise. But 2 decades of training reminded me that intelligence comes before action. So I parked my truck and began recon on my own property like it was a compromised mission site. I approached the gate with the careful, measured steps of someone who had cleared more hostile compounds than he could count. The original lock had been cut off and replaced with a shiny new padlock engraved with the Sunset Hills HOA logo. I photographed everything with my phone, then used my bolt cutters to remove their lock. My land, my gate, my rules. Inside, fresh tire tracks crisscrossed the dirt. Several someones had been treating my ranch like their personal recreation area. For the next 2 hours, I documented every violation. The chain link fence ran straight through a seasonal creek bed, which wasn't just trespassing, it violated federal water rights. They'd bulldozed native plants to create a volleyball court. HOA-branded trash bins sat neatly in rows, like they were marking territory, and the insult of all insults, a huge sign by the windmill, proclaiming it the Sunset Hills Historical Monument, complete with the completely fabricated backstory about the HOA's early settlers. I was snapping photos of that ridiculous sign when I heard engines approaching fast. Dust billowed up from the road. 2 sheriff's cruisers rolled in with lights flashing, coming to a tactical stop. Deputies stepped out with their hands resting on their weapons. Right behind them, in a spotless white SUV, came Karen. She practically launched herself from the vehicle before it had stopped moving, face flushed with fury and triumph. She jabbed her finger toward me with dramatic flair and shrieked, "That's him. That's the trespasser I called about. He's been lurking around this abandoned property all morning. He cut our lock and broke into our community space." The lead deputy, his stripes marking him as a sergeant, approached me with caution. His hand hovered near his pistol, but his expression leaned more toward confusion than threat. He spoke in a steady, professional voice. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification. We received a report that you're trespassing on HOA property." I stayed perfectly still, hands visible, and answered calmly, "Sergeant, happy to comply. I'm reaching for my wallet now." I slowly retrieved my ID and handed it over. "My name is Cole Garrison. This is my ranch. I've just returned from an 8-month deployment." He studied my military ID and Nevada license. When he saw the clearance level on my military credentials, his expression noticeably shifted. Meanwhile, Karen buzzed behind him, practically vibrating with impatience. "Why are you stalling?" she barked. "Arrest him. He's trespassing on HOA property. I have the documentation right here." Her voice hit a pitch that probably registered on seismographs. The sergeant raised one hand to silence her, then turned back to me. "Mr. Garrison, can you prove ownership of this property?" "I can do better than that," I replied. "May I retrieve documents from my truck?" He granted permission, and I walked to my vehicle, retrieving a secured folder I always kept under the seat. Inside were copies of the deed, property tax receipts, and something else, a document that made the sergeant's eyes widen. A Department of Defense letter, on official letterhead, stating that this property was the registered home of record for an active duty service member with TS or C clearance. Everything about the sergeant's demeanor changed in an instant. He handed the folder back, squared his shoulders, and turned to Karen with a very different tone. "Ma'am, can you explain why you filed a trespassing complaint against the legal owner of this property?" Karen's complexion drained from red to ghostly pale, but she snapped back quickly, her voice rising defensively. "That's impossible. This land has been abandoned for months," she insisted, voice trembling with fury. "I filed the proper paperwork with the county. I have receipts. This is an HOA community space now." She tore into her oversized purse and yanked out a handful of crumpled documents, waving them like she was brandishing evidence at a trial. The sergeant took the papers and examined them one by one, his expression tightening with each page. After a long moment, he looked up at her, disbelief written across his face. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "these documents don't transfer ownership of anything. This is just a filing receipt, and it clearly shows the claim was rejected." He tapped the bold red stamp across the top. "Denied property owned. Did you not see this?" Karen snatched the paper back and stared at the stamp as if it had magically appeared. Then, with a sudden burst of confidence, she declared, "That's just a formality. My lawyer said adverse possession applies after 6 months of obvious use. We've been maintaining and improving this abandoned land." I couldn't help myself. "Maintaining?" I said, letting a bit of amusement slip into my tone. "You mean trespassing?" "Improving," I added. "You mean vandalizing?" In Nevada, adverse possession requires 21 years of continuous, open, notorious use, not 6 months of wishful suburban fantasy. The sergeant nodded and added, "Mr. Garrison is correct. And ma'am, based on what I'm seeing, you've also installed structures, altered the landscape, and possibly filed a false report. These are serious offenses." Karen's perfectly styled hair seemed to deflate as the truth set in, but she still wasn't ready to give up. With the stubborn resolve of someone who had never faced real consequences, she switched tactics. "This is harassment," she proclaimed, jabbing an accusing finger toward me. "He's trying to intimidate me. I'm the president of the Sunset Hills HOA, and I acted in the community's best interest. If he truly owns this land, why hasn't he been here? Why did he abandon it?" I opened my folder again and pulled out another document, the one that made the sergeant step back and caused the second deputy to relax his grip on his weapon. A classification notice. A formal statement that I had been deployed on a matter of national security, signed by someone whose name alone could stop conversations. "I've been serving our country, ma'am," I said evenly. "The nature of my work doesn't allow me to always be home." But this land has never been abandoned. It has been monitored, maintained, and protected every day I was gone. The sergeant cleared his throat and shifted his posture to something more official. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to withdraw all claims to this property immediately. Mr. Garrison, do you wish to press charges for trespassing, vandalism, and filing a false report? Karen cycled through shades of red and purple before bursting out. This is ridiculous. I'm the victim. This man just shows up out of nowhere, claiming to own land that's been abandoned. You need to investigate this properly. The second deputy, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke with thinly veiled irritation. Ma'am, we have investigated. The property owner has shown valid documentation. You, however, admitted to cutting his lock, installing fences on his land, and filing claims you knew were denied. I strongly suggest you stop talking before you add more charges to your list. But Karen was far past reason. Years of unchecked power in her tiny HOA kingdom had convinced her that her will was law. She whipped out her phone, hit record, and raised her chin dramatically. I'm documenting this harassment by local law enforcement and a suspicious individual claiming military connections. My followers on the Sunset Hills Facebook page will hear. The sergeant sighed and turned to me. Mr. Garrison, I apologize for this entire situation. Given the evidence, I strongly recommend pressing charges. We'll need to document everything. I appreciate that, Sergeant, I said. But first, I need to make a call. I pulled out my secure phone and dialed a memorized number. After 2 rings, a familiar voice answered. Colonel, this is Garrison, I said. I have a situation at my property involving false claims and local law enforcement. Yes, sir. Understood. Thank you, sir. The call lasted under 30 seconds, but its impact was immediate. 5 minutes later, the sergeant's radio crackled with a priority message from dispatch. His eyes widened as he listened. These instructions came from far above his normal chain of command. Karen sensed the shift and panicked. Her confidence collapsed into trembling fear. She scrambled for one more attempt, her voice desperate. Look, maybe we started off wrong. I'm sure we can figure this out like neighbors. There's no reason to involve lawyers. Let's just talk this through. I studied her for a moment. She no longer looked like an HOA president, just a small person who'd tasted a drop of power and drowned in it. In combat, I'd learned to recognize when an opponent was finished. Karen was finished. She just didn't know it. Ma'am, I said calmly, you built illegal structures on my land, held events here without permission, and filed fraudulent claims with the county. You've cost me time, money, and patience I don't have. So no, we won't be settling this between neighbors. We'll settle it in court. The sergeant stepped forward, voice firm. Patricia Kellerman, you're under arrest for criminal trespassing, vandalism, and filing a false police report. You have the right to remain silent. As he read her rights, Karen's entire world crumbled. The HOA members who had gathered, expecting a triumphant confrontation, instead watched their president being handcuffed and placed in the back of a cruiser. Phones were already out, spreading the news through the Sunset Hills gossip channels at record speed. But my day was far from done. After Karen was escorted away, I made my calls first to my property management company, then to a property rights law firm with instructions to pursue every legal remedy available. Then I contacted a fencing crew not to build, but to tear down every trace of Karen's intrusion. During the next 3 weeks, the full scope of her misconduct surfaced. She hadn't just trespassed. She'd used HOA funds to pay for fencing and landscaping without board approval. She forged documents claiming the board voted to acquire my land. She even tried filing a lien for unpaid HOA dues despite the irrefutable fact that my ranch wasn't, and had never been, part of her association. The legal process moved with surprising speed. Maybe it was because of my military connections, or maybe the evidence against Karen was simply impossible to ignore. Either way, she soon found herself facing a stack of charges, criminal and civil alike. The criminal trespassing charge alone carries up to 6 months in jail. The vandalism count, given the extent of the damage she caused, had escalated to a felony. Filing a false police report added another misdemeanor, but it was the federal charges that shook her the most. Because I was active duty military on deployment and because she knowingly tampered with the property of someone with national security clearance. Karen had inadvertently violated federal statutes designed to protect deployed service members from predatory behavior. The Service Members Civil Relief Act was just the start. Her actions were classified as an attempted fraud against a member of the armed forces, triggering a level of legal scrutiny she never imagined she'd face. The HOA board called an emergency meeting, and I attended as a guest. The room was filled with residents who had spent years living under Karen's petty tyranny. When the board president called for a vote of no confidence, every hand went up. Karen was removed from her position immediately. The board voted to fully cooperate with investigators. Then Robert Dalton, the retired judge Karen had dismissed, stood and addressed the room. With dry satisfaction, he said, "I motion that this board issue a formal apology to Mr. Garrison and cover all his legal expenses through the HOA's insurance. Since our former president's reckless actions exposed us to serious liability, the motion passed without a single objection." The board's attorney, who looked exhausted enough to collapse, estimated their total exposure at over $200,000, possibly more once punitive damages were calculated. Homeowners murmured anxiously, already anticipating special assessments. Karen's good name had officially turned to mud, but the civil consequences were only the beginning. The criminal case moved forward quickly. Karen's lawyer, a frazzled public defender juggling too many clients, tried arguing that she truly believed the land was abandoned. The prosecutor, a former Navy JAG officer, dismantled that argument piece by piece. He presented the rejected county filings, statements from neighbors who had warned her, and emails she'd sent the HOA board admitting she wasn't sure the land was unclaimed, but insisted they forge ahead anyway. The trial lasted 3 days. I testified for 2 hours, calmly describing what I found upon returning home, my family's ranch carved up and repurposed into Karen's personal empire. The photographs I'd taken of the fences, the cut locks, the vandalized windmill were entered into evidence. The fencing company employees also testified, confirming that Karen instructed them to work quickly before anyone notices. Against her lawyer's desperate advice, Karen took the stand. She simply couldn't help herself. Years of unchecked power had convinced her she was persuasive. Instead, she buried herself deeper. She admitted she knew the county denied her claim, but insisted she had a moral right to improve abandoned property. She admitted to cutting my lock, claiming it was for community safety. She even admitted to using HOA funds without approval, arguing it was within her executive authority. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. When the judge, a no-nonsense woman with zero tolerance for entitlement, delivered the sentence, Sunset Hills collectively gasped. For criminal trespassing and vandalism, Karen received 4 months in county jail and 2 years probation. For filing a false police report, she got another 30 days. Then came the federal penalties. For attempting to defraud a service member, she was fined $50,000 and sentenced to an additional 6 months in federal prison. As the judge finished reading the sentence, Karen's composure shattered. She sobbed uncontrollably as the bailiff approached with handcuffs, begging for leniency. That wasn't coming. The judge's final words were razor sharp. "Mrs. Kellerman, you abused your authority, violated federal protections for service members, and showed no remorse until confronted with consequences. This sentence reflects the seriousness of your actions and will serve as a warning to those who believe deployed military personnel are easy targets." While Karen was still in custody, her husband filed for divorce. The civil suits financially ruined both of them. She lost her real estate license after her conviction. Their home was sold to pay attorneys' fees and fines. And in the ultimate twist of irony, the new HOA board voted to ban her from Sunset Hills permanently. The last time I saw her was at the final civil damages hearing. She looked like a shadow of her former self, gray roots showing, dressed plainly, all the fire gone. When the judge announced a final judgment of $375,000, she didn't argue. She simply lowered her eyes, finally understanding the true cost of her self-appointed reign. As for me, I returned to my ranch and upgraded security further. The same fencing company Karen hired to invade my property now worked for me, installing a proper perimeter equipped with motion sensors and cameras. At the gate, I added a custom sign: "Property of a classified ghost trespassers will vanish." The county sheriff briefed every deputy on who owned Garrison Ranch and why it was not to be disturbed. The Sunset Hills HOA sent a formal apology and a check covering every cent of my legal expenses. They also passed new bylaws requiring full board approval for any action involving outside property and mandatory legal review before filing land-related claims. They called it the Kellerman Rule, ensuring Karen's legacy was a cautionary tale, not a precedent. I continue serving my country, disappearing for months on missions I can't discuss. But now, when I return home, I find my ranch exactly as I left it, protected by the law, by technology, and by a community that learned the hard way that absence does not equal abandonment. And somewhere in a minimum security federal facility, Karen Kellerman has plenty of time to reflect on the difference between being a big fish in a small pond and trying to swim in waters far beyond her depth. The judge's gavel struck one final time, making the $375,000 judgment permanent and non-dischargeable. Karen's attorney whispered frantically, likely explaining that bankruptcy would not erase this debt. She glanced at me one last time, eyes hollow, understanding at last that her ambitions had cost her everything. As the bailiff led her away to begin her 10-month combined sentence, she stumbled, the full weight of her actions finally pressing down. The courtroom doors closed behind her with a heavy, final thud.